Story number 1. When we still lived in Southeast Asia, my parents had some chickens at the farm. Our farm is right in between our village and another village. Often, I would visit my girlfriend's village on the other side of the mountain. If I came back home late at night and was too tired, I would sometimes sleep in our farmhouse, but most nights I would go straight home. I remember one day my parents told me that after visiting my girlfriend, I should sleep at the farmhouse to see what was killing our chickens. For the past few days, a few of our chickens had gone missing. There was no blood or feathers anywhere. The chickens just disappeared. My father had set up some traps, but had not caught anything. One night, I was coming back from my girlfriend's village, and when I reached our farm, it was around 3 a.m. I could hear the chickens making noises as if they were scared. I quietly approached the chicken coops and noticed a little boy, around 8 years old, reaching into the coop. I flashed my light at him and said, "Who are you? Who are your parents?" The boy didn't turn to look at me, but took off running towards the west side of the farm. I told him to wait and chased after him. We ran out of our farm onto the dirt path. I flashed my light at him and saw him running ahead, turning into a bamboo grove. I ran after him into the bamboo grove and saw him running uphill. I was getting very close, as he couldn't run uphill very fast. Before we reached the top, I kicked the boy from behind, and he fell down over the top of the hill onto the other side. I got to the top and looked down, but I didn't see the boy anywhere. He had just vanished. I looked around with my flashlight, walking and calling out, until I came to an old child's grave. I looked at the old yellow bamboo tied together as a stretcher on top of the grave and realized it was smaller, indicating it was for a child. The Hmong often tied bamboo together like a stretcher and carried their dead to be buried in the mountain. After burial, they would sometimes lay the stretcher on top of the grave. I got scared and ran back to the farmhouse, closing the door behind me. The next day, when my parents came to the farm, I told them what had happened. My father asked me to show him the grave. I took him there, and we noticed the bamboo used to make the stretcher was very old and brittle. It was an old child's grave. Later, when we had dinner at the farmhouse, my father took some food outside and left it at the edge of the farm for the little boy. My father has been doing that every time, and ever since then, our chickens haven't gone missing. Story number 2. When my father was still alive, he loved hunting. Whenever he went hunting, he would be gone for a few days, and when he returned, he would bring back meat that had already been dehydrated. He always hunted alone. However, the one time he went hunting with others, he was shot because they mistook him for a tiger walking in an area of tall, dry yellow grass. The person who shot him was none other than my father's younger brother, Shao. They said that on that day, Shao wanted to try using a rifle but only had a bow. Therefore, my father taught Shao how to use his rifle and then gave it to him for the day. Unfortunately, Shao accidentally shot my father. Many of them were hunting together, so they were able to bring my father back to the village for a funeral. After we buried my father, we sought the help of a shaman from another village. The reason was that Shao and my father loved each other, and we believed it was an accident, or that something in the jungle probably made my father look like a tiger. It's a common belief that there are demons and spirits in the jungle that could possess other people and make them look like an animal. During the shamanic ritual, the shaman told us that since my father had taken so many animal lives, the guardian of the jungle wanted his and one of his family members' lives. Therefore, the forest had already made him look like an animal way before that day when he was shot. Even when he was out hunting alone, he would look like an animal, and whoever saw him would most likely shoot him too. The shaman also said that my father's rifle, which had killed so many animals, would also kill one of his family members if we continued to use it. After the shamanic ritual, we decided to give the rifle to the shaman. A few years later, a tiger started attacking and taking livestock from the villagers' farms. Tiger footprints could be seen whenever an animal was attacked or went missing. The villagers would follow the blood trail and the tiger footprints, and eventually they would find the missing animal. For some strange reason, the tiger only ate a little of the animal and left the rest to rot. Eventually, the villagers gathered and set a trap. They placed an old and sick cow in a small cage at the edge of the village at night and set up the trap with 8 rifles. Right around midnight, we heard multiple shots coming from where the old cow was. But since it was nighttime, everyone was too scared to go check. In the morning, we all went to check and found the old cow unharmed. Next to the mouth of the cage was a dead tiger. Everyone poked the tiger with a stick, and once we confirmed it was dead, we examined it and realized it had been shot 7 times. Everyone was amazed at how effective the trap was, because almost all the bullets had hit the tiger. My uncle Shao was there too, and just as someone said, "This trap is very good," the 8th shot was heard, and my uncle screamed in pain. He had been shot in the stomach. For some reason, the 8th rifle had not fired until that moment. The string tied to the trigger had already been loose, meaning the rifle should have fired when the tiger stepped on it the previous night, but the shot didn't go off until that morning. Unfortunately, Uncle Shao died that day. When we examined the 8th rifle, it turned out to be my father's old rifle. We asked how that rifle had ended up back in our village. The villager who owned it said he had bought it from someone in another village. This meant the shaman had sold the rifle to someone, and that person had sold it to the man in our village. After that incident, we took the rifle apart and burned it, hoping that if any spirits were possessing it, they would be burned or flee. That was one of the strangest occurrences in our family history. Story number 3. When we were migrating to Thailand, there were a lot of us, at least 6 families traveling together in the jungle. We were trying to escape a war-torn country. I remember we came to a tall mountain, and the forest was dense. When we got there, we decided to stay in that area. We could see evidence that people had passed through because there were old sugarcane peels scattered around. Whenever we decided to rest in an area, we would always make an offering to the guardian of that place to protect us on our journey to Thailand. The guardian of the place usually referred to a spirit that lived in the area where we rest. As the leader, when we ate dinner, I took some food and stepped outside the group. I offered the food to the guardian of the mountain by placing it on a rock or tree stump, asking for protection since we were resting at the foot of the mountain that night. I remember that night when everyone was starting to fall asleep, we heard the calling. At first, it sounded like the call of an eagle. You could hear the calling echo throughout the jungle. Eventually, the calling began to sound like it was mentioning some names. This calling is clearly from a demon we called the leenu. Leenu looks like a giant owl with red eyes and lived high up on the top of the tree. The more we listened, the more it sounded like 3 names were being mentioned: my younger brother Kue, his wife, and their son. As Hmong, we know that when Leenu is calling, you must not answer it. All you can do is sleep on your side, so the Leenu demon cannot take your soul. The parents advised their kids to sleep on their side that night. The next day, as we traveled around the foot of the mountain, Kue, his wife, and his son triggered a mine, and they were all killed in the explosion. All 3 of them, whose names were mentioned during the Leenu calling the previous night, ended up dead that day. Everyone was scared and ran away to hide for the whole day. Around sunset, 2 men and I went back to see if the Vietnamese or Laotian soldiers were at the site where my brother and his family had died. No one was there. We managed to cover my brother and his family with some dirt and leaves, and then returned to our hiding spot. I was angry and sad for losing my brother, but there was nothing I can do. That night, as we slept, we heard it again, the calling of leenu. This time it was calling everyone in our group, from the old to the young. Two men and I decided to track where the calling was coming from and go kill the leenu. As we tracked the calling, we realized it was coming from the tall mountain. As we walked up the mountain about halfway, we realized the calling was getting closer, which meant the leenu was nearby. We came to an old tall tree where the calling was coming from and looked up. We saw a huge owl with red glowing eyes looking down at us. By this time it had stopped calling. I aimed my rifle at it, but one of the men with me tapped my shoulder and said, "Don't shoot. Let's just go back. Don't shoot." I lowered my rifle and asked him why we shouldn't shoot. He said he would tell me when we got back. I thought maybe he saw or knew something that I didn't. As we got back to our hiding spot, that man told me that we had been offering food and calling for the protection of the guardian in the area. So, he suggested we continue to stay in the hiding spot and not go anywhere the next day. We did as he said, and the next day, we didn't travel, but stayed in our hiding spot. As we traveled through the jungle to the Mekong River, there were nights when we didn't hear the calling and nights when we did. However, it wasn't that the leenu was trying to take our souls. It was more like a warning that whoever's name was called would die if we continued forward. On nights when there was no calling, we would move to a different spot the next day. On nights when there was a calling, we stayed in the same area the next day. Eventually, we all made it to Thailand, except for my younger brother Quay and his family. The leenu demon is one of the most feared demons that the Hmong have come to know. The Hmong tend to live high up in the mountains, where the leenu also resides. After many encounters, the Hmong realized that when there's a leenu calling, never ever respond, even if it's calling your name. Responding to the call will result in your death. Story number 4. When I was still a young man, I loved listening to scary ghost stories. In Laos, there were nights when the elders would stay up telling ghost stories outside. I remember a grandpa saying that if we really want to see ghosts, we have to find a leaf that a caterpillar has eaten a hole in. If we look through that hole, we will see ghosts. One day, I was at the farm with my parents. My brother and I would pick out green vegetables that already had holes in them and look through them. We would take them with us everywhere we went, just to look around, but we never saw anything unusual. One day, a young man in our village ate poison and passed away. This man was a soldier who came back from the war, only to find out that his longtime girlfriend had gotten married to her relative's son and was already pregnant. The villagers said that this young man had been acting strange, as if he kept talking to someone at night when no one was there. It was like the spirits had convinced him to eat poison so they could take him, since being alive meant suffering through so much pain. When they were holding his funeral back at the village, I was at the farm with my mother. My father was helping out with the funeral. That day, I found 2 mustard green leaves with holes. The first leaf had one hole eaten by a green caterpillar, and the second one had 2 holes. I decided to take those 2 leaves home with me. That night I brought the 2 leaves with me to the funeral with my father. I had the leaves in my pocket, and when I got there, I sat in the corner and used the leaf with one hole to look at the corpse on the wall. There was nothing unusual. It was already the 3rd day of the funeral, so the corpse was starting to decompose badly on top of the bamboo stretcher. I used the second leaf with 2 holes to look at the corpse, and he did not look decomposed at all. He was laughing while the drummer and the bamboo piper played at the funeral. He kept laughing and laughing on top of the bamboo stretcher. When I took the leaf away, the corpse wasn't laughing. I thought it was strange. I went outside and looked on the side of the house with the leaf with 2 holes, and I could see 2 little girls. They were forcing their little hands through the woven bamboo walls to tickle the corpse inside the house. I went back inside and told my father, and he knuckled me on the head, ripped my leaf apart, and told me to go home. I went home alone since we lived nearby. About an hour later, my father came back with an elder. The elder performed a shamanic soul-calling ritual and tied a red string to my wrist. The purpose of the soul-calling ritual is to prevent my soul from following the dead into the underworld. When we came to the US, I wanted to try again, but it's hard to find a leaf that has 2 holes eaten by a caterpillar. Those of you who have those leaves should try it during a funeral, and see if you see something strange like I did back in Laos. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.